Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Exactly 1 week ago today, Joe Biden was sworn into office, becoming the 46th president of the United States. While his foreign policy focus for the time being remains on getting America's own house in order, the rest of the world, including those of us here on the Korean Peninsula, are kept wondering what his administration's foreign policy will be like, especially when it comes to dealing with North Korea. What will the Biden administration mean for the two Koreas? Hello and welcome to our viewers in Korea and all around the world. Together with AMCHAM, we interrupt our regular programming today to bring you this special program. I'm Jennifer Moon alongside James Kim. It's great to co-host this live show with you, James.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's great to be able to co-host this program with you today. The Fireside Chat is an AMCHAM staple. Like the origin of the word, the Fireside Chat is a unique AMCHAM event where we have intimate, in-depth conversations with key figures from business and government around the world. So partnering with you, Jen, and Arirang TV today makes this a truly special event.
Right, this is Arirang TV and AMCHAM special Fireside Chat with Joseph Yoon.
I said, because North Korea is a problem, on the condition that he would agree that he would be drawing down his nuclear capacity to get that the Korean Peninsula should be a nuclear-free zone.
Ambassador Joseph Yoon is former U.S. Special Representative for North Korea policy and one of the leading experts on U.S. relations with North Korea.
Joe, it is great to have you with us live today. We've had the privilege of inviting you to many AMCHAM events over the many years, and there's no one we trust more to give us the true insights like today.
Thank you very much, James and Jan. It's really good to be with you. As James mentioned, I have talked a lot with business groups there and in Korea. So it's always good to be back with AMCHAM, and I'm quite honored to be with you with Arirang, Jan.
Thank you. Now, Ambassador Yoon, 1 week into office, the Biden administration has made certain foreign policy personnel appointments on Asia, one naming Kurt Campbell as his Asia czar and Sung Kim as the acting assistant secretary at the State Department. What do we expect Kurt Campbell to bring to the role, and what will his priorities be when it comes to the two Koreas? And what about the appointment of Sung Kim? Do we see a certain resolve in North Korea-U.S. talks here?
Well, I've known Kurt Campbell for a long time. In fact, for 15 years so, both working in the government and outside the government. In the government, he was really a force, bringing a lot of initiative, a lot of thought and energy into Asian region at the time. And, you may have heard of U.S. policy during the Obama administration called Pivot to Asia. That is, I would say, Kurt Campbell's signature U.S. policy at aiming at the time, of course, to try to compete better with China and bringing others like-minded countries, especially Korea, Japan, India, Australia, into making sure that China behaves according to international rules and laws. So I do expect in his more elevated position, Kurt Campbell, as senior coordinator for Indo-Pacific affairs, he will bring the same type of energy and drive. And so I think he's an excellent appointment. Sung Kim, I've known also for a long time. Of course, he's a fellow Korean American, a fellow American diplomat, and I've worked him both in the region and in Washington. And he has a terrific wealth of experience behind him. Of course, he has been ambassador to South Korea, ambassador to Philippines, and before me, he was also at the same position as I do, which is a special representative for North Korea policy. You know, North Korea is always a very, very hard policy issue to deal with, and I am delighted that both Kurt and Sung Kim will be working on this issue because we rely, and I trust their instinct and their experience will be an enormous guiding factor.
You know, Joe, you've had an amazing career ranging from Special Representative for North Korea policy to U.S. Ambassador to Malaysia. And I'm very proud of you, by the way, for all you're doing. From your perspective, how do you think President Biden's first 100 days will look?
His first 100 days, without question, Biden himself wants to concentrate on domestic issues. By far the biggest domestic issue is, of course, COVID-19 and what the government response should be. I mean, you know as well as I do, the situation in the U.S. is terrible. And who would have thought in the U.S., there would be 25 million people who have been tested positive for COVID-19 and well over 400,000 deaths. This is really atrocious. And we will long remember 2020 as a lost year, and everyone is suffering, believe me. And so his first test is, can he get domestic, especially COVID-19, under control? But of course, you know, it's not always what you aim to do that you end up doing. There are, especially on the foreign affairs, there are crises that happen without any predictability. I remember being in Obama administration when, you know, I worked then for the Secretary Clinton, when initially we were really hit hard by what happened in the Middle East, especially North Africa. And then, of course, in Bush administration, you had 9/11. And this one, so these kind of crises can happen without warning. So while Biden wants to concentrate on relieving from suffering from COVID-19, who knows what kind of other crises are in store for him.
Right. So when he does focus on foreign policy, his foreign policy will be very different from that of President Trump's, I believe. What about on North Korea? President Biden, when he was vice president to President Obama, worked with a principle of strategic patience vis-a-vis North Korea. How do you expect President Biden to reshape U.S. policy towards North Korea?
So a few days ago, we had a very interesting confirmation hearing by Antony Blinken, who is to become, and I believe maybe today, he was confirmed to become Secretary of State. And he was asked that same question, Jen. That is, how will President Biden approach North Korea? And his answer is, of course, they want a diplomatic solution for North Korea to denuclearize, and that they would review the policy on the Biden as they go into this. And I think that's a sensible start to review the policy. My hope is that the Biden administration don't disown everything that Trump did. I mean, you know, there are many things that Trump did right. And I think part of his North Korea policy is correct, which is to engage North Korea in a different way. And of course, they had 3 meetings between Kim Jong-un and Trump, and there is an agreement or joint statement that Kim and Trump drafted and signed in Singapore. So, you know, Kim Jong-un has made it clear, and that was an interesting aspect of eighth Party Congress that took place about 10 days ago, that he still valued diplomacy with Trump, the joint statement they made in Singapore, that he valued that. And so that is something that the new Biden administration should consider. How can they use the Singapore joint statement to the benefit? Now, having said that, I really do not expect Biden to engage in summit diplomacy without very, very careful preparation. If you look at Biden administration, they really have a number of people who are very cautious, who will work out all the things that has to work out before a summit meeting is held. So I don't think it's going to be, media show as much as it was under Trump. But still, I hope that Biden administration will find a way to quickly engage North Korea and so provide much needed stability in North Korea, within Korean Peninsula.
You know, Joe, AMCHAM had the honor of hosting then Deputy Secretary of State Blinken. It was actually in 2015. I really, really enjoyed meeting him at that time. What is he like now versus, let's say, 2015? And what can we do to support him here in South Korea?
Well, thank you. I've known also Tony. I've worked very closely with him for a long time. He really is what I call, very established diplomat. He has worked, as you recall, as Deputy Secretary in State Department. He's worked at National Security Council, and he's also worked in foreign affairs in the U.S. Senate. So really, he comes with a deep background, deep knowledge of U.S. foreign policy, how it should be conducted. When I worked with him in the State Department, when he was Deputy Secretary, he really paid very close attention to alliances. And for him, alliances were very important. And that means in Asia, how U.S. deals with South Korea, where U.S., of course, has some 28,000 troops, and how U.S. deals with Japan, where U.S. has some 48,000 troops. So for Tony, how U.S. gets along with Tokyo and Seoul is critically important. And of course, corollary to that is how South Korea gets along Japan. So he did a lot of work during Obama administration, trying from the from the backseat to get South Korea and Japan to get along much better. And let's admit it, right now, South Korea and Japan relationship is probably in the poorest state I have seen in my 35 years of doing this kind of work. It needs to improve. Really, I think for the United States, key emphasis will be bringing South Korea and Japan together and then having frequent meetings, including summit trilateral meetings and so on.
So Ambassador Yoon, we didn't see much of U.S. involvement in improving South Korea-Japan relations in the last 4 years, if you will. How do you expect, for instance, Secretary of State Tony Blinken to play a role in improving Seoul-Tokyo relations, salvaging it from a new low that we've been seeing in recent days?
Well, thank you. I think, Jen, your question gets to the heart of what is the difference between Trump and Biden in terms of foreign policy. And I would say for Trump, you all know, make America great again. That means we are going to make America great again. And we really don't care what goes on outside. We're going to do it ourselves by building a wall, limiting our trade, and limiting people coming in, so on. So that is, one way to do it, obviously, and that has attracted a lot of people. I do believe Biden's way is more traditional. We're going to do it by building friendships, building alliance partnership, by going abroad and making these bridges. So that's where alliances with Japan and South Korea comes in. And I think for the United States, obviously with troops there and having a very big and strong competitive agenda with China, U.S. truly feels that we need to line up support, especially strong support among our allies. So I do believe, for example, in Obama administration, U.S. spent a lot of effort in GSOMIA, which is the agreement between Japan and South Korea to exchange intelligence, and also encouraged that very strongly. And U.S. also encouraged coming to terms, some kind of agreement on comfort women, the sex slaves during the Second World War, coming to agreement on those. So this is where I think U.S. encouragement is a factor, trying to get over some hump and make sure that it's acceptable. Now, that's not an easy task. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to try to get Japanese and South Koreans to agree some these history issues, which have really been, doggedly bothering many generations for decades. So it's gonna be a struggle, but I do think more Washington pays attention to these issues, I think the better the relationship between South Korea and Japan.
Absolutely. Now, shifting back to North Korea, the Biden administration's sequence of policy attention will likely be, I'm sure, get America's own house in order, strengthen U.S. alliances and align strategies toward China and Russia, like you said, Ambassador Yoon, and then address Iran and North Korea. But as you know, Ambassador Yoon, North Korea never likes to be ignored. You have much experience negotiating with the North Koreans. What do you expect from North Korea, and how would you advise the Biden administration?
Well, if I really had a magic wand to solve that, I would be doing a lot better than I am, obviously now. Now, Jen, North Korea is, I would say, among U.S. foreign policy challenges, it really ranks top three. One is, of course, Arab-Israeli issue. Second is, of course, Iran issue. And third, I think, is a North Korea issue. It's a problem, if anything, despite what Trump decided to do, has gotten worse. Worse in a sense that North Korea now has more nuclear weapons and more capability, missile capability, than they did 4 years ago when Trump came to power. So, I mean, being a Korean American, I do believe there is a tremendous cultural gap and communications gap between Pyongyang and Washington. I mean, simply put, Washington is simply not used to dealing with North Korea and not used to dealing in their way of communications and not really understanding the mentality. So it is a very difficult conversation with North Korea. And of course, North Koreans don't make that any easier by presenting themselves in the best possible light. And so you can see the frustration, on both sides whenever we have meetings, whenever we have negotiations, because we appear to be so far apart. And the reality is that I do believe with better communication, some things can progress. So, for example, it would be a non-starter for Biden administration to hold on to this whole concept of CVID, which is complete, irreversible, verifiable denuclearization. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen soon. It's not going to happen in the foreseeable future. So they need to move on to a better model, negotiate what they can, build some level of trust and confidence in each other. And then, once the relationship gets better, you have better communication. So North Koreans, when I used to meet with them, they would always, I would say, what is it going to take? I asked them. And they would say, United States must end its hostile policy towards North Korea. And so what do you mean by hostile policy? And they're at a loss. For them, it's obvious. For me, it's not obvious what hostile policy is. I mean, do they mean withdrawal of troops from South Korea? Do they mean U.S. itself getting rid of all nuclear weapons? Do they mean some promise that Kim Jong-un regime will be there forever, some kind of guarantee? Those things U.S. cannot do. Often they mean that U.S. should not criticize North Korea. And I asked them, what do you mean criticize North Korea? And they will mention, op-ed in New York Times. They should know U.S. government does not control New York Times. Donald Trump knows that very well, He called them fake news. And so therein lies a tremendous gap. I do believe it is a lot easier talking with the Iranians than with North Koreans.
So Joe, let me ask you a very quick follow-up question on North Korea. They've been pretty quiet lately. So very quickly, how do you interpret this, number one? And do you expect the silence to continue?
James, I think some of the credit for North Koreans being so quiet recently go to South Korea for really encouraging North Korea, to persuading them to not do any nuclear tests, not do any missile tests until Biden, is well in place. So, despite all the noise of the 8-party Congress, I saw that as North Koreans saying, we want to talk. And we want to talk with Biden administration. We want Biden administration to give us the signal, that you want to talk. And so I do hope that Biden administration grabs that and give a clear signal that they want diplomacy, they want engagement. And I think partly because of that, Tony Blinken has been saying that, humanitarian assistance, U.S. can do humanitarian assistance. So, with your second question, how long will they be happy, staying quiet and being ignored? I don't know that, but really longer they are quiet, more room it gives Biden administration pro-engagement folks. Clearly, if North Korea was to do a nuclear test or a long-range missile test, Biden administration will have no choice but to go towards pressure option, sanctions, military drills, and so on, And that's no good. We don't need that. So I do hope that North Korea gives more time to Biden administration, and so that we can have diplomacy and to at least little by little begin to repair damage of past decades.
바이든 행정부하고 우리 한국 정부는 여러모로 이 가치 지향이나 정책 기조에서 유사한 점들이 있고, 또 이른바 이제 코드가 같다고 느껴지는 부분들이 있기 때문에
Hey Joe, President Biden has pledged to repair our alliances and engage with the world once again. Those are his quotations. What concrete moves do you expect President Biden to take, and what are the potential implications for Korea?
Well, James, I do believe that there are a number of issues outstanding, that Trump has left behind. The most obvious one is burden sharing, SMA, Special Measures Agreement, in which the money paid by South Korean government to U.S. government for the cost of stationing troops in South Korea. Now, the part of Trump's motto is to try to get allies to pay as much as possible. I do believe Biden will move away from that, and I would really look for a quick, early agreement, and this big irritant between Seoul and Washington will go away. The second one, very much related to U.S. troops being here, is of course the transfer of wartime operation control, so-called wartime OPCON transfer. Now, President Moon has made it really his big goal to get that finally accomplished before he leaves office in next year. I think that will be difficult. Because that goes into the fundamental question of U.S. presence, U.S. command and control issues. So that will be a difficult issue. And I hope, because it was so difficult, remember we were going to do it, during Nomeon era. That was commitment made by Nomeon at the time. And then, of course, President Lee Myung-bak punted it. And then Park Geun-hye also punted it because it is a difficult issue. And I would hope that everyone could accept that this has to be punted again, So that's another one issue. Now, of course, the key issue will be the difference between Biden and Moon on approaching North Korea. And I hope there, again, as Biden has stated many times, he looks forward to working with South Korea. I had the opportunity when Biden was vice president to travel with him in Southeast Asia. So, I got to know him a little bit. And he's a very personable, leader, politician. He wants to make personal connection. So he will definitely wanted to make personal connection with President Moon, his counterpart here. And of course, that relationship has to get off on the right footing. And then I think they can have a real discussion on their own vision for North Korea. Because, while the end goal is the same, how to get there is slightly different.
Mm-hmm. Well, we also know that South Korean President Moon Jae-in is also a big believer of creating personal rapport. So hopefully we'll be able to see that kind of chemistry between the two leaders. President Moon Jae-in recently, Ambassador Yoon, named his former National Security Advisor Chung Eui-yong, who played a bridging role in an unprecedented summit between North Korea and the U.S. in 2018 as a new foreign minister. What kind of a foreign policy team do you expect him to lead, and how compatible do you think Biden's foreign and national security team will be with Moon's team here, particularly in dealing with North Korea?
Well, in South Korea, of course, you do have really accomplished diplomats, and Chung Eui-yong is one of them, and he gets full credit and for what he did during the Winter Olympics. Of course, behind him is very consistent policy from President Moon that he wants to engage with North Korea. He wants to reach some results from North Korea, and despite the setbacks, he is going to do that. And so Washington knows that perfectly. You look at team in South Korea led by Chung Eui-yong and Seo-hoon, and they are very much team that is built to engage North Korea. But I do hope that they need to understand from the U.S. point of view that some of the early things that South Korea government has talked about, such as peace declaration, it's a little bit difficult for Washington because they do see that there has to be some give and take. What do I mean by give and take? By give and take, North Korea must be prepared to at least take initial steps towards freeze of their nuclear program and missile program. And then I do think U.S. will respond in a correspondingly. For the United States, things like peace declaration, end of war declaration is really a political statement that should come before there have been, after there has been improvement in relationship. So these step-by-step issues are, I think, where we're going to have to get into discussion between Seoul and Washington and carefully craft the path. And this is a complicated roadmap. But like, there is an old Korean saying, the first button in your shirt has to be right for the rest of the shirt to look good. And so I hope by close consultations between Seoul and Washington, we have the first button right.
Ambassador Yoon, President Joe Biden is set to name a new U.S. ambassador to South Korea. What kind of background and qualities do you expect President Biden to seek when he appoints his top diplomats to Seoul? And to me, at least, your background seems ideal for a U.S. ambassador to Korea. Can this be a reality?
So let me just say, typically U.S. ambassadors to Korea have been either political appointees or diplomatic career appointees from the Foreign Service. And if you look at political appointees, they have been major important figures, big figures in terms of policy side with a lot of in-depth experience. Not the usual type of political appointee who got there through big money contributions in election or, being very helpful in the election side. So we've had some very good ambassadors and, both on the political side and Korea side. As for me, this is not something I have given much thought about. I retired over 2 years ago and, I have a pretty good life. I can speak freely to you and I enjoy that, and so really I work for U.S. Institute of Peace and the Asia Group. The latter is a private consulting group. And so that keeps me in beer and wine money, so which is good. And so I've not given it much thought.
But Joe, anytime I can get you closer to Korea, that would make me very happy. So I hope all goes well, regardless of what you wind up doing or what you wind up continuing to do. But if you were advising President Moon, especially given the change in administration, how would you encourage him to approach diplomacy?
My advice is cheap, by the way, because it's free, But what I would tell him is that this is a problem, especially his number one goal is, of course, North Korea, that I believe has become bigger and bigger. And I'm not sure that there is a solution out there. But right now, it is about management. How do we manage so that there is no crisis? How do we manage so that there is more step-by-step approach? And I do believe Korea has a big role to play in managing North Korea. And so I think that is what I would stress. Second thing I would stress to him is that U.S. is still a huge presence in Asia Pacific. Sure, U.S. took a little bit of beating during Trump era. And sure, of course, there is rising China and that big challenge of China. And so I do believe that it would be a mistake to disengage from U.S. especially, and really the values of South Korean people and American people are very strong together. They're very similar. And when I look at opinion polls in South Korea, I am genuinely surprised how much there is support for United States and alliance relationship. So I do believe the Korean government has to be very careful about trying to pull away from U.S. And my rule of thumb for anyone, as I say, advice is cheap, is never bet against the U.S.
So, Joe, let's talk a little bit about the business community. As you know, AMCHAM is the largest foreign business chamber in South Korea today. We obviously have a lot of U.S. companies that are doing really well in South Korea. So what can we, from the business community, do to support President Biden and President Moon?
I think the key to, AmCham has been remarkably successful, by the way, James, and really I applaud your leadership in AmCham in working towards that. And I think the key pillar of, if I look at U.S. and the South Korean relationship, is trade and investment. And this trade and investment doesn't just happen. It happens because we have a FTA agreement. It happens because, there are many people to make it happen, not just on policy side and on business side. So our job, for you and for me, is to encourage more investment, more FDI, more money going back and forth, because money speaks. And for the policymakers, it is critically important. This pillar is critically important that there is so much at stake. So I would like to see more growth in trade and investment. And U.S. is a good market. U.S. is a good market, and many companies have made very good investments here. Just last year, I went to a major opening of Lotte petrochemical complex down in Louisiana, and that was a $3 billion investment. And so I really want to encourage South Koreans to invest more, and there are, of course, a lot of Korean Americans here. And so I do believe, and then I want to encourage American companies to invest in South Korea. And that's the way the relationship becomes stronger still.
Right. Ambassador Yoon, as noted by President Moon during his New Year's press conference, there's a lot of overlap between the agendas of the Moon and Biden administrations. The South Korean president mentioned public health, security, the economy, and climate change as areas of bilateral cooperations. What do you think will be the most productive areas?
I do, and this depends, from the Korean point of view or U.S. point of view. From U.S. purely policy point of view, I think Americans want to see Korea play a bigger regional role, bigger role in the region in terms of, say, pandemics is certainly one, climate change is other, but even on sensitive issues like South China Sea, where China has been making bigger and bigger claims. And then, of course, in values, but a Biden administration takes values seriously, which means, issues like democracy, human rights, labor issues. So these are issues that U.S. and South Korea have very close, similar outlook. And so we would hope, certainly that's the American hope, that we can build a relationship that represents U.S.-South Korean alliance in the region that is more than China, that is more than North Korea, but it is about South Korea playing a real role in global issues.
Joe, on more of a personal note, you're one of only a handful of Korean Americans who became U.S. ambassador. You also mentioned Sung Kim, who remains a very close friend of mine. As a Korean American, what does it mean for you to be a U.S. ambassador?
I joined the State Department in 1985, and in my entering class, there were, 45 people in my entering class. And, we'll talk about in our entering class, what our dreams would be. And, it didn't seem realistic at the time I would ever become a U.S. ambassador because it is such a lofty height. And when you first join as a junior officer, and your first assignment is stamping visas, and so from that, you say, oh my goodness, am I ever going to get out of this bureaucratic hell, But then, things happen. And so I've been, fortunate to become a U.S. ambassador. It means a lot. It obviously means a lot because when I was U.S. ambassador in Malaysia, you are U.S. representative in Malaysia. You are the president's choice to be in Malaysia. And every American government workers in Malaysia report to you. You have, it's almost like a little kingdom, and so there is a huge degree of responsibility associated with it. So it means a lot. I mean, I would very much encourage, and we do have, when I joined the State Department in 1985, there were 2 other Korean Americans in the Foreign Service. They were obviously more senior than me. But now, by my count, we probably have 60, 70 Korean Americans in the Foreign Service. You mentioned Sung Kim, obviously, very successful. And I have another friend, Yuri Kim, who is now U.S. ambassador to Albania. She's very smart, and we all 3 of us work together. And so it's a small club, but becoming bigger and bigger. So I really do want to encourage Korean Americans to seek public service positions, and especially federal government positions, and because it can be rewarding, and for us to work on behalf of the United States, it's a real honor.
He's one of the better prepared for this job. No one's better prepared, in my view.
I want to say to you, America is back. In the years that I've worked in government,
Ambassador Yoon, the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said earlier this week that the Biden administration is approaching its relationship with Beijing with patience and plans to review hardline policies that were a hallmark of Donald Trump's presidency. We take it the review of measures will include trade tariffs and the delisting of certain Chinese companies that were enacted by Trump. How do we expect President Biden's approach to China to differ from President Trump's?
Well, I hope they don't use that word patience too much, because it reminds me of strategic patience. That was Obama's policy towards North Korea. And, it probably wasn't all that successful, So I hope they use different words. But more seriously, when you look at China issues, that is by far the number 1 Biden priority for Asia policy and foreign policy in Asia. And I do think, Biden and the team want to really calm the relationship a little bit. They really don't want to go to the counter threat that we've been experiencing with Trump administration over the past few years. So it will not be based on threats of tariff and actual tariffs. It will not be based on exclusion. So, but then clearly, between US and China, we really have 2 baskets. One I call competitive agenda. And competitive agenda is very strong competition. They include items like strategic trade, items like sensitive technology, items like intellectual property rights. And then, of course, we have issues like Hong Kong, Taiwan, That's what I call competitive agenda. But at the same time, there is also what I call cooperative agenda. Things like pandemics. We need to work together on COVID-19 and other diseases. Climate change. We need to work together on climate change. And among cooperative agenda is North Korea. North Korean nuclear weapons are also a threat to China, threat to the region, as well as the United States. So for me, when I was both in Biden administration and Trump administration, that's how we pitched it to the Chinese, saying, listen, let's work together on North Korea. Maybe that will build the momentum to work together on other issues. So I do believe the instinct of Secretary of State to be Tony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is to have these two items, cooperative agenda and competitive agenda, and try to build confidence in cooperative agenda and then move that to competitive agenda.
So, Joe, just in the past several years, I think South Korea has found itself sandwiched between U.S. and China. Obviously, China is Korea's largest trading partner. U.S. is the second largest, but there are different powerful dynamics between U.S. and Korea, which is beyond the trading side of the equation. So what do you advise, or how do you advise the South Korean administration with the new Biden administration coming in as far as this kind of dynamic is concerned?
Yeah, I think over the past few years, South Korean government especially has been put in very, very difficult position by the Trump administration, whose really motto is, if you're not with us, you are against us. Now, South Korea shouldn't be given a black and white options. That's not what diplomacy is about. And so if I was advising the South Korean government, I would say to the South Korean government, look at these two agendas, cooperative agenda and competitive agenda. Within cooperative agenda, there are many things that South Koreans can agree on. For example, on trade issues, unfair trade. South Korea was the biggest victim of China over whole THAAD affair. I mean, how unfair is it to have your defense, being victimized by trade on the Chinese part? Companies like Lotte were really hurt by that, and I think that really didn't do either country any good. And it was really a lesson, I do think, from not just for South Korea, but many folks out there. So for South Korea, they need to join competitive agenda, which in general, international community agrees, such as trade rules, sensitive technology items, not stealing each other technology, and maybe not so much on purely political items like Hong Kong, Xinjiang, or Taiwan, but on those ones where, for example, G20 is by and large together. I think South Korea should join. And then South Korea should join, of course, be a leader in the cooperative agenda on pandemics and on climate change, and then have a special role to play on bringing about China and U.S. on North Korea issue.
Well, as much as we'd like to speak to you for a longer period of time, this is really all the time we have. Any final thoughts before we let you go, Ambassador Joseph Yun?
Well, you have really questioned me out, so I don't have too many final thoughts to thank you, but to also thank all your viewers. Arirang is just doing a terrific job. I used to watch it when I was in Malaysia, and the programming has improved so much and is so compelling, and you tell Korea stories so well. And also I want to thank James, my good friend James, who is really doing an amazing job at AMCHAM. And, now I look at it, he could be an anchor in Arirang,
I agree with you. Yeah, he could be my co-anchor. Well, Ambassador Joseph Yun, thank you so much for your insights, for your expertise, and for your time speaking with us this morning. We really, really appreciate it. And this wraps up our live special fireside chat with Joseph Yun, brought to you together with AMCHAM as we welcome the new Biden-Harris administration in the United States. It was wonderful working with AMCHAM and co-hosting the show with you, James.
Thank you very much.